Hello there, good afternoon, and welcome to this week's Ukraine War question and answer session with the inimitable Professor Michael Clarke. Professor Clarke, great to have you be across from you. We always have you, but great to be across from you again. I had a week off last week, but I'm happy to be back this week. Thank you all, as always, for submitting your questions. We've had plenty this week, and of course, you can submit questions as we go along, should you wish to choose to do so. Anything that Michael says that tickles your fancy, sparks your interest, submit a question and we'll try and get it answered. You can do that on our YouTube channel or through our website along in the blog. All right, Michael, before we go any further, why don't we, first of all, just take a sense as to where we are with all of this at the moment. I mean, we were just talking before we went live about how it's just seemed that Donald Trump has done a complete 180.
Yeah, one phone call with Putin and he turns his mind around completely and suddenly all the facts are different. But that's where we are. I mean, I've been saying since the middle of March that President Trump is zigzagging his way out of this war. And every week brings another turn, a zig or a zag. And the zigzags, in a way, are important because at the point at which America does leave this conflict, and I have to say I thought they'd be out by now, but they're still in it. But at the point at which he does leave the conflict, it's the question of who does he blame for the failure of his diplomacy? Because it's important to the Ukrainians that the Americans keep on supplying some intelligence and targeting data, which, as I keep saying, they collect it anyway. So it costs them nothing to give it to Ukraine. If they withhold it from Ukraine as an act of punishment, as it were, which they have done a couple of times, then it will have a big effect. So the terms upon which the United States leaves the conflict, as it were, are important. And so the zigzags matter. But the underlying course is that President Trump will give up on all of this and let events take their course.
Right, and that is where we find ourselves moving towards. I mean, some could argue that the US are already kind of out of it. They're not spending anything. All their weapons are being paid for by the Europeans. As you say, they're already collecting that data. So there's not very much more they have to do apart from give the rhetorical support, the backing to Ukraine, which he seems to have changed his mind on a little bit.
And there is one issue that I was talking about with some specialists yesterday, that if the United States, as it were, pulls out of the war rhetorically, and therefore there is quite a big split between the Europeans and the United States, which again I've been thinking would happen earlier. It hasn't yet happened. I thought it would have happened by now, but it hasn't. But we're on course for that to happen. If that happens, then there is a possibility then that President Putin will say, right, this is my opportunity to really hit Ukraine with everything I've got and put the Europeans under pressure to either you're going to support Ukraine or you're not. Because now the United States is detached from the process. And so it's all down to you. You are the ones, the Europeans are the ones keeping this war going because you're not sensible. You won't pull the plug on Ukraine, which ultimately you're going to have to do. So do it now before more people die. So the rhetorical difference between the US pulling out of the war, giving up on the whole peace idea, peace process, might have a stimulating effect on Putin saying, right, this is my moment to challenge the Europeans, either support Ukraine and go to war with us, or pull the plug on Ukraine and let the inevitable happen. Yeah. That's the view I mean, that's not the truth as I see it, but that is the view in Moscow, that they will inevitably win this war. It's just a question of how foolish the West is for how long they are foolish enough to support the Ukrainians.
In clinging on. I mean, Donald Trump has used the words of Putin that Russia will destroy Ukraine during that meeting. Let's go to the first question because it's about that meeting. Right. It's from Jared. He said there were reports of files being thrown around the room when Trump and Zelenskyy met last week in the White House. I didn't see that when they sit around the dinner table, but this was obviously in the private meeting that they had. Trump's then seems to have been talked down somewhat. Jared's question, is there an adult in the room helping smooth this over, or is it all just him?
No, Jared, it's a good question. I mean, this was a Financial Times scoop of about 48 hours ago. They scooped something by talking to people who were in the room, and they said what Trump did, Zelenskyy was putting maps in front of him of where the front line was, and I think Zelenskyy was trying to show him that the Ukrainians were making progress and that the Russians were not making progress and that the Ukrainians were actually doing quite well. And Trump was so fed up with this, he sort of scooped the maps onto the floor. I don't think it was files, but reportedly it was the maps. Yeah. And they said it was a shouting match. I don't know if they just meant raised voices.
And he was swearing a lot during the meeting.
And a lot of
as well.
swearing. I mean, Trump does do a lot of swearing. I think so does Zelenskyy as well, but whether he swears in English or not, or Ukrainian.
Well, this is the thing you always point out, he's speaking in his third language, and it's not...
That's right.
As he readily admits, he's not great in English, so
He's not,
it's difficult.
No, I mean, his first language is Russian. His second language is Ukrainian. He wasn't a very good Ukrainian speaker, for most of his youth. He learned it as he developed his TV career and then his political career. And, of course, English is his third language. But the meeting was obviously heated. And I think Zelenskyy, he does have a fairly short fuse, and he's been a war leader now since 2022. And he does push back. And I think there would seem to be something to push back against. So he went to Washington with the expectation that they'd be discussing Tomahawk cruise missiles. And the view from Kiev that I was getting last week was that they did expect to get Tomahawks, but not maybe immediately. And that if Putin had suggested a meeting, Trump wasn't going to supply Tomahawks ahead of that meeting. He'd wait to see what happens. And that is still plausible, that this meeting is due to take place. We don't have a date yet, but relatively soon in Budapest. And there's some interesting issues around why should the meeting be in Hungary.
We will come on to that.
A member of the EU, a member of NATO, and all the rest of it.
Not a member of the ICC, though, which is important.
Well, Hungary is still in the ICC. It's said it is withdrawing, but the withdrawal doesn't take place until next June.
Excellent.
So as of now, Orban is committed to arrest Putin if he appears in Hungary, but he's already said he won't.
Right. They announced they're going to withdraw,
they have announced their withdrawal, but the withdrawal doesn't take effect until June 2026.
Excellent.
So, Orban is just going to ignore it. As indeed will Trump if he goes to... Trump is not bound to arrest Putin because America is not a member of the ICC, but Trump will ignore the fact that Orban is ignoring it. And, that's the way of the world at the moment. International law counts for less and less. It's disappearing as a force in world politics across the globe, unfortunately. Yeah. So this is just another example of the disrespect for law. But it's an insult to the EU and to NATO that Orban is going to hold this in Hungary. And Orban, remember, has got elections next year in which he's not looking terribly favoured. I think in terms of public opinion, he would lose it badly if he doesn't fix the election. But believe me, he will fix the election.
He's captured the state, hasn't he? He's been there long enough to have complete control of the media and the judges. Yeah.
So, he's facing a domestic problem next year. And this will boost his prestige, at least internationally. But it is a difficult meeting to have. And we haven't got a date yet. It's said to be soon, so maybe next week, maybe the week after. And the Ukrainians, going back to Tomahawks, they know they're not going to get Tomahawks until after that meeting, and maybe never, is now the expectation. But undoubtedly, President Trump had reversed his position since the phone call with President Putin. And so there you are. Every time Putin speaks to him, he gives in.
It's just extraordinary as well, the sequencing of it. That call comes in. We know they're going to meet. We know there's all this discussion of Tomahawks, and yet suddenly out of the blue, we hear that there's been a 2-hour phone call between Putin...
At Putin's request.
Right.
So Putin outmaneuvered Zelenskyy, and you realise that this was getting serious. So he arranged a phone call with Trump and completely took Trump on a different path. He controls him every time they meet. I keep a tally of these things. And, others do as well, but I keep a tally of the tally. And he's met him, Trump and Putin have met 7 times since 2017, personally, possibly 8 times, because Trump claimed to David Letterman before he had a political career that he knew Putin. He's a tough guy. And then when he was on the campaign trail, he said, I don't know him, never met him, don't know him. And so he probably did meet him, although he denies it later on.
Did he do a Miss World in Moscow? Wasn't that the famous?
He did, but he didn't. He said not to have met Putin on that occasion, but who knows? But he's met him 7 times officially. He's had at least 15 phone calls with him, possibly 16 or 17, including phone calls, according to Bob Woodward, the investigative journalist, in between his 2 presidencies when he was out of power.
Yep.
He phoned him at least 7, or had phone calls with him at least 7 times. So if you put all these things together, he's had at least 22 or 23, maybe 25 personal one-to-one interactions with Trump, either face-to-face or online or on the phone. And on not a single occasion that I can discern has Trump come away having persuaded Putin to do anything he wasn't going to do. On every single occasion, Trump comes away with the Putin line on everything. He basically does what Putin tells him to do after these calls.
Well, we don't have time to speculate as to why that might be, Michael, but I know you've got some opinions on it, and many of our viewers will have opinions.
Well, I know a lot of people do have opinions.
Right.
About it. I don't know. I know nothing.
I don't know. You know nothing. It's all out there. We can all... come to our own conclusion as to why.
Yeah,
you go on.
All I'm saying is a factual issue.
Yes, exactly.
An empirical issue. On at least 22 or 23 occasions, there's been a direct meeting or a direct interaction between them. And on none of those occasions, has Putin apparently changed any of the positions that he started with.
And if anything, especially with this one, what we can see is that Trump going, we sat around this table talking about the rhetorical shift, how they seem to be backing Ukraine, talking about what Russia's a paper tiger, talking about their economy,
being suffering, they're losing the war. No, suddenly.
One phone call.
That's right. Suddenly now. And he also said in that, he said, the Russians have spent 3 years taking 1% of Ukrainian territory. No, Mr. Trump, 20% of Ukrainian territory, not 1%, 20%. But there you are, he pulls these figures out of thin air.
We could do an entire podcast on the things that he has got wrong. We're not talking about the wars that he pretended to have stopped that weren't actually wars. But let's move on to this question here from Paul, who says, Trump has gone from saying Ukraine could retake all the territory that it had lost, that was the rhetorical shift, to now parroting Kremlin lines. And also, as I said, saying that Putin will destroy Zelenskyy in that fractious meeting at the weekend. Paul asks, is there a discernible strategy? You might have answered that question.
No, well, no, there isn't. There is a discernible objective in Trump. There is one objective which he holds on to all the time, that this war should be seen to at least have a ceasefire, and that he, Donald Trump, will have created it.
Right.
So his objective is to be the man who stops the fighting, whether as a ceasefire or as a whole peace thing. That's his overwhelming objective, because and he knows next to nothing about the background of the conflict. He's not very interested in what the conflict is about. He has this intrinsic interest in Russia and intrinsic admiration for Putin, which infuses what he thinks. So he has an objective, which is all about me. I need to be seen to stop the fighting. But the strategy for doing that is all over the place. I mean, it's everything. He doesn't have a strategy. He lives in the moment. He lives day to day, week to week. I mean, and William Hague, the previous British Foreign Secretary, very well respected observer of foreign affairs. I mean, he in the Times about a month ago said President Trump's foreign policy is clueless. Right, that's the word he used, clueless. Now, as I say, other adjectives are available.
They are available. It's a good one to use, I think.
That's right, yeah. But clueless is fine, in the sense that that's what it is. He just blunders around the international world with an ultimate objective that me, should be seen to do this, should be seen to do that. But his strategies for doing this or doing that are next to non-existent.
Well, I'm not trying to psychoanalyze him too much, because we've got loads of time to do that. There is no sort of philosophy behind it. There's no ideology behind it. We were told Boris Johnson said, Putin must fail and be seen to fail.
Putin must fail. Yeah.
Other leaders as well who said that if Putin were to succeed in any way in his invasion of Ukraine, the impact that would have on international affairs, on international law, is something that no leader will be able to countenance. Donald Trump doesn't seem to have any of that sort of consequence in his mind if Putin gets the things that he wants.
No, he doesn't. That's the point. He has a view of international affairs which is an extension of his view on property deals. That you bully and shout, and then you get round a table and you split the difference and you walk away, and everybody comes away with a piece of property.
The way to describe it is deal. That's the thing. It's the word. Giveaway.
As I said, there are reasons why international relations are difficult. And he doesn't seem to see the difficulties. And sometimes it is good to have leaders who cut through the issues, leaders who come from a naive base and just go for it. I mean, sometimes that can help, and if that leader is the United States president, that can have enormous power behind it. But the limitations of doing that are usually greater than the advantages, and those advantages are usually fairly short term, and they have to be grasped quickly. And the point is, President Trump doesn't have any intellectual hinterland on anything. He doesn't read any books, even the ones he's supposed to have written. He doesn't read anything. He absorbs all his information from what people tell him and what he sees on television.
The last person that's told him something.
Absolutely.
As well.
And he's not the first president who's like that. George W. Bush was like that. Didn't read anything. Ronald Reagan didn't read much, but Ronald Reagan did appoint very good people around.
Good people around, had a team of people who was able to make good executive decisions.
Reagan had good teams around him. He had a nous about him, actually.
Whereas Trump is all about.
I came to respect. I didn't like him to start with, but I came to respect Reagan for what he knew his own limitations. He wasn't stupid. And he brought a sort of folksy common sense to the presidency with good people. George W. Bush brought an arrogance to the presidency with no intellectual hinterland. And Trump is like, George W. Bush on steroids in that respect.
I always am amazed by the sort of the reassessment of George W. Bush and how people would love to have a George W. Bush now versus Donald J.
We used
Trump.
to think he was the worst president America ever had.
I remember having a book of some Bushisms that all the mistakes and mannerisms, and now we have this leader.
Well, this is,
now.
the Trump presidency is extraordinary, not just because of him, but because the team who are now there are the MAGA Republicans who are Christian nationalists, and they're infusing this presidency with what is now called Christian nationalism, which is trying to create a social revolution throughout the Western world and a different way of viewing the world. It is revisionist because it's trying to change the rules of world politics, which America itself has been the foundation of for the last century.
Well, they've got an ideological ally in Putin in that regard, in some regards, in that way,
Absolutely.
right?
They want the same sort of thing that Putin wants, and the same sort of thing that Xi Jinping wants. And in a way, if there is a philosophy behind Trump, it is to try to navigate the way in which the world can be divided up in terms of influence between the three great leaders. If there's a sort of vision there, if there is a vision, it's some sort of vision of a division of the world into three big spheres of influence.
Well,
George Orwell would have understood it.
Yeah, and as you say, also, that puts him right at the heart of it, doesn't it? And that is that sort of great man theory that he has in his own head.
That's right.
All right, let's keep it moving. Rosie, we may have answered your question. This is about Putin going to Hungary. But I wonder if you do anything more you want to say about the idea of him being arrested if he goes to Budapest?
Not on the ICC front. I mean, it's only that, thankfully, one compensation, that President Putin will probably have a very long air journey.
He'll have to fly around.
Big loop.
Right, because he can't fly across countries that are signatories, right?
Well, he shouldn't. I mean, he can claim diplomatic immunity with a state aircraft, an official aircraft, and he may get it from some countries, but not others. They may not grant diplomatic immunity. So if he flew over Western European countries, he wouldn't get diplomatic immunity. They wouldn't grant it to him. They make it difficult for his aircraft to use their airspace. So what he'll have to do is fly across the Black Sea, across Turkey, who would give him immunity, and then northwards over Greece, probably get it from Greece, and then North Macedonia, or the FYROM rather, the former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia.
Very good.
Stupid name, but anyway, Macedonia, you and me. And then into Serbia.
Okay.
And then all the way through Serbia and into Hungary. So he has to fly the southern route, where he will be granted diplomatic immunity for his aircraft if he goes the southern route. So, he's going to have to spend 6 hours in the air, so good.
If and when it happens, we watch more Flight
Tracker.
Tracker.
Be a long journey for him, good.
Watching that Aeroflot make its way up. Yeah. Poor guy. All right, let's move on to a question here from Andrew Smith. It's still about Hungary and Viktor Orban. Question is Orban Putin's secret weapon against the EU and NATO? He's been a thorn in the side of those organisations for a long time, right?
Yeah, it's not so secret. I mean, Orban is a great admirer of Putin, and along with Fico in Slovakia next door, Hungary and Slovakia are the two big holdout states, both in the EU and in NATO.
Can you give us a little history lesson why Orban and Putin are so aligned? Are they just the same sort of strongman types, or is there anything else?
Well, because Orban's talked about illiberal democracy. I mean, he was an old opposition leader who then established a sort of foothold with his Fidesz party in Hungary, and then found that he rather liked power. And his instincts are similar to Putin. So he's very conservative, very sort of anti-gay in his thinking, anti-progressive in that sense, very anti-woke. And he was the man who coined the phrase, we don't have liberal, everyone talks about liberal democracies. Well, I like an illiberal democracy. And it's illiberal, and it's not terribly democratic either these days. And so this is a man who stays in power. He's a great autocrat. And he casts himself as the only European leader who's really interested in peace, because he wants Putin to succeed. And if Putin succeeds, the war will stop, in his view. And if Putin has more influence over Eastern and Southern Europe, then he calculates that Hungary, under his leadership, can do quite well out of it.
Yeah.
But I mean, you can see why the EU in particular is really fed up with Hungary. I mean, Hungary makes up less than 1% of the collective GDP of the European Union, just on 1%. And Slovakia, next door, makes up 0.75%. So between them, these two holdout states, who are the sort of two Putin clients in Europe, who basically do everything that Putin would want them to do to frustrate collective action as far as they can, make up between them less than 2% of the $22 trillion worth of collective GDP of the 27 members of the EU. So they're tiny. They have no impact economically, or very little impact. And yet they have, because of the way decisions have to be made in the EU and in NATO, they have this disproportionate influence, and people really get fed up with them. So when the EU ministers meet on Thursday this week, Orban is going to be late at the meeting.
He's on a national holiday
for state reasons, so that they'll be able to agree what they need to agree without him, and he will come in later and make a fuss about different things.
Can they do that? Can they agree without them? I was going to ask you this question.
Well, they can if he absents himself, and so Hungary does go along with some, like on sanctions.
Yeah.
They're onto the 19th package of sanctions that has to be agreed by all members, and they lean on him. The EU is withholding lots of payments to Hungary over his failure of democracies and so on, failure of democratic institutions, and his undermining of those institutions. So they have some levers against him, and he plays a sort of game with them. I'll give in on this if you give me some of the money you owe me, and so on. And so it goes on. But there are a lot of leaders, particularly in Northern Europe, where all the toughies are, who just say, throw them out. They're a nuisance. These people are, or these countries are a nuisance. And then against that, people say, look, he's not going to be there forever. He may be kicked out next year.
You say that. He has been Prime Minister, at least in power, since 1990. I didn't realise it was that long. He had a previous non-consecutive term, 98 to 2002, and then came back to power. And he's been in power ever since, which is a long old time, at least 5 terms.
Yeah,
and NATO members in 1999, it's just a year after he first became Prime Minister. Again, what do I call them, thorn in the side, that are they Hungary a decent NATO member? I mean, is that at this stage?
No, they've not. Slovakia was a very good NATO member before Fico became Prime Minister in terms of helping Ukraine and trying to be collaborative. But Fico's completely reversed the initiative there. Again, not on the basis of Ukraine issues, really, on the basis of immigration and this kind of right-wing, the MAGA Republican sort of populism. And it's at large, that sort of MAGA Republican populism is at large throughout Eastern and Southern Europe in different ways. In Greece, certainly it's in Germany, in the eastern parts of Germany, and in other southern countries, it's quite strong. So, NATO is in some political difficulties, even though it's holding together just about from a political sense, a political point of view. But Hungary and Slovakia are problem states, which NATO and the EU, they manage them. It hasn't stopped them doing the most important things, but it still slows everything down. And both NATO and the EU are on the verge this week of taking some really big decisions on Ukraine.
Well, that's what I want you to talk about. 'Cause it's not on our question list, but it is important to talk about what this summit is all about on Thursday. This is all about making sure that those seized, what you call frozen Russian assets, the money from which can be used, given to Ukraine for them to use as they wish, and underwritten by a loan.
Yeah, and we're very close to that now. The EU is very close. So the figures kind of vary on this all the time, but these are the headline figures. Of all the frozen Russian assets, most of them are in Europe, and they're in the Euroclear system, which is run from Belgium. And there are two, because the euros and dollars, people think it's the same thing, but it isn't because the values have turned. But let's talk in dollars. So there are 235 billion worth of dollars frozen in Europe, most of which is in Euroclear in Belgium, which the Belgian government, therefore, is in control of. And the idea now, and they're very close to making a decision, possibly on Thursday, is that they're not going to give those assets to Ukraine. They will give what looks like 160 billion, might be a first tranche of those assets, 180 billion dollars, to Ukraine as a loan. So the money stays where it is, but they give them a loan on a long-term basis in zero interest to be paid back when the Russians pay reparations at the end of this war, which is pigs will be flying everywhere before that happens. So in theory, it's to be paid back by the Ukrainians when the Russians pay reparations to Ukraine, and then Ukraine will be able to pay the money back to Euroclear, and Euroclear will say, there's the asset, you can have that back.
Take your money back,
That's what they're proposing. The Russians say this is theft, which in a way it is, but it's legal theft in the sense that there is a legal process based on an arrangement which can be made from a banking point of view. and the Russians will challenge it legally.
Yeah.
And the Belgians are saying if the Russians will challenge it,
good.
if they succeed, they're not likely to, but if they do, we the Belgians want to make sure that other countries will make good.
You're going to
we don't
help
want to
us
be
out.
liable
Exactly.
for all of this money.
And that seems to be the main sticking point, doesn't it? To make sure that you can.
And I think the other
Belgians.
countries will say, look, I mean, it's not going to happen. So yes, we'll back it up, because the Europeans are desperate, right? They've made all sorts of other loans available to the Ukrainians. They've put quite a lot of money in themselves. And they're now desperate. And they now know they need to make a big gesture, because of what's happening in the States, a big gesture of support to Ukraine to show that they will continue. And with this money, I mean, the Ukrainians need about $100 billion a year to keep going for all purposes.
Yeah.
Now, I mean, that's in addition to what they raise themselves, their own taxation, revenue, and so on. They need about $100 billion a year in foreign aid for military and government purposes. So this would, the amount of frozen Russian assets will keep them going probably for 3 or 4 years, if all of it was available. If 150, 160 billions worth of it is available, that's a good year and a half, 2 years or something like that. So it would show that the Europeans can underwrite Ukraine's survival financially for a while. And the Ukrainians they're doing so well in producing their own weapons. If they had more money, they could produce them more quickly.
Interesting. Just a quick thought, because we are ticking on. We've been talking a lot, Michael. Potential backlash from Russia about this? I mean, apart from getting litigious, and we know what Russians think about international law anyway, so maybe we don't care so much about that. And does this plan now supersede that plan that was talked about using the interest from some of this money sitting around?
The interest was useful, but the interest only came to about 5 to 7 billion euros a year. But what the Europeans then did, they said, OK, we'll collateralise that, and we'll give you 5 years worth in one go. So they gave them like 50 billion in one hit. And you can pay it back to us in tranches over 5 years under certain conditions. Again, which is fine. But they've now reached another juncture where they say, look, we've either got to underwrite Ukraine's survival or not. And that's where we are because of where America is.
Rubber hitting road. Yeah. OK, well, Thursday, so one to watch.
Thursday,
a couple of days.
It may not all happen on Thursday, but Thursday, if it doesn't put us very close to the situation, then the Europeans are in big trouble.
Let's hope that they make the right decision. Okay, let's move on to talking about tomahawks, if we can. Carl G, thank you for this question, because it's one that's been in my mind as well. So we know that the US seem reluctant to give tomahawks, probably not happening now. The question is, do the UK, France and Germany have the capacity or capability to supply similar versions of the same thing? I'm interested to see whether we don't have anything in that range. 1,500 miles, isn't it?
Yeah, Britain has Britain has tomahawks, which we have on our astute submarines. We use them the same way the Americans do. They're the American weapon on our submarines. But even if we gave the Ukrainians all that we've got, and some people say, give them our tomahawks. Well, I mean, it's a secret how many we've got, but it is generally believed it's probably 50 or 60.
Okay.
I mean, our whole inventory is the sort of numbers that the Americans use up in one strike.
I wish you hadn't said it was only 50 or 60. Hoping there'd be so many more than that.
It's not believed to be several hundred anyway. It's believed to be in the tens,
right,
not the hundreds.
Okay.
And it's as many as the US use on one strike against the Houthi, or have done.
Yeah.
And it's like everything else in British defence. I mean, we've got top-of-the-range, world-class stuff.
But 3 of them.
Use it once, you've used it. There's nothing else.
Okay,
we've got one-shot forces. Nobody else operates Tomahawks in Europe that I'm aware of.
And no one has anything of that range in Europe?
No, they're all developing them. We've got Storm Shadow and Scalp. Is our version, and the French version is about a third of the range. The French are developing a naval Scalp, which would have something like more than half Tomahawk's range, maybe 2/3 Tomahawk's range. And there are lots of things in the pipeline. And Taurus, the German missile, it's a very good missile, but it's still only got about the same range as Storm Shadow. Yep. So the simple answer is no. Tomahawks are uniquely good at having this long range. It's not that the warhead is so big, it's just that they're very accurate, hard to defend against, and they've got a long range.
Yep.
And only Britain could throw a few into the mix, and 50 or 60, I'm sure the Ukrainians would be very grateful, but it wouldn't make any real difference.
No.
500. I mean, when Trump allegedly said that when he spoke to Putin on the phone, how would you feel about tomahawks, about 1,000 or 2,000 tomahawks coming your way? I don't know where he pulls that figure out from. But I mean, if you were talking about 1,000 or more tomahawks, yes, that would. I mean, the Russians are sufficiently worried by that.
No, it's a good product. They
get
know,
onto it.
Yeah.
But we're not talking about 1,000. I mean, realistically, the Ukrainians were talking about, some dozens.
I mean, a conversation I wanted to have with you for ages is about industry and how you can ramp up production. Raytheon make the Tomahawk. I wonder what their production lines are like at the moment and how much they have in terms of their order book and whether that would be something that you could look at.
They can't meet the orders. I mean, their orders have stepped up now, and they're on, is it tranche 4 now, tranche 4, tranche 5, or block 4, block 5, where each one is an improvement on the last one. It's the same missile, but with more bells and whistles. And Raytheon can't keep up with the demands which the Pentagon are now putting in, because they think they may need a stockpile that's bigger than the one they used to have before.
Interesting.
And because they're thinking of the Pacific and China.
Yeah, we've got to open small factories. I mean, as I said, that's a conversation I would love us to have at some point, Michael. We're going to keep on with these, though, because this is another question about Ukraine's cruise missile, that Flamingo that we talked about before. I think you kind of answered this. This is from David K. Thank you for this question, David. With the money, could Ukraine ramp up production? Do they have the means to be able to do this if they had that extra money?
Could. Right. Yeah, they could. And they could have more joint production of it in different ways with European partners. Already, see, one of the reasons that the Russians have been putting a lot of pressure, it seems, on Denmark is that the Danes have got a factory now which is due to come into operation this December, in really fast production and fast legal clearance to produce solid fuel for the Flamingo drone. It is a drone. It's a drone. It's a rocket. It looks like an old V1, an old doodlebug. Yeah. So it's got it's basically a rocket with a motor stuck on the top at the back, but it works, and it's accurate and it's got long range. And the Ukrainians know it's not as good as a Tomahawk, but it's a good substitute for Tomahawk, and they need to ramp up production. It's called the FP5, coming from their own manufacturer. And the Danes are now helping because solid fuel is quite difficult to produce. It's quite high tech. It's really important to have solid fuel rockets, not liquid fuel.
Yep.
Because solid fuel is just like a ram you put in that you put into
liquid fuel. There's danger.
And there it goes.
Yep.
Rather than having to put liquid fuel into things, which takes time and is dangerous and all the rest of it. So producing solid fuel for Flamingo is a big help, and other European players could help with Flamingo and other products. But Flamingo is a drone technically. But it's the same. It does the same thing as the rocket. Yeah.
But again, it's this thing, isn't it? We talked about this early in the war, Mike, when we were discussing things about getting those military industry production lines in place, and it's just such a shame that at this point in the war you don't have production lines working around the clock in all over Europe to make sure that Ukraine is.
No, I mean Europe is ramping up. I mean, but the word is ramping.
I know,
not has ramped up.
We've talked about this, man, and it's like it's taking time, and they're still ticking up to it.
Everyone I speak to and stuff I read tells me that we won't feel any difference across Europe until 2027, 2028. When the things that are the investments now will start to pay off then. But it's a tough couple of years in terms of arms production, if that's the name of the game for Europe at the moment.
Yeah, let's hope it's not too late for Ukraine and for Europe more broadly. Couple of questions here, sort of more broadly, Michael. We'll rattle through these because I think we've gone on for quite long enough, guys. It's from Carolyn, who's a regular viewer from Australia. She says you love your work, which we all do. What direct impact is Trump's unpredictable behaviour having on this war? His perspective constantly changing. Would it be different, do you think, if there was a Democrat in power?
Oh, it all depends on the person. Think about Joe Biden had, from our point of view in Europe, the right instincts. He was like a president from a previous era, who was transatlantic, who was international law focused, who was about universalism. He looked, he felt like a 20th century president, not a 21st century president. But he was too weak in lots of ways. He wouldn't commit himself. He was
scared of the escalation, wasn't he? He was very scared of the escalation, from what we understand.
He was very frightened, and he took a lot of advice from Jake Sullivan, who was his national security advisor, who was always worried about escalation. Whereas Tony Blinken, his Secretary of State, was much more forward-leaning on these things, saying that we've got to go for this. Because this is the world we're in, and Jake Sullivan said, "Well, be careful, Mr. President." And Joe Biden, projected an image of a right-thinking man who couldn't quite bring humself to take really strong decisions. I think other Democrats. You think about Bill Clinton. Would be much more consistent. He was quite a strategic thinker. Yeah, Bill Clinton. So was Jimmy Carter, but poor old Jimmy Carter.
He skipped over Barack Obama.
And Barack Obama was he was good strategically, but his thinking on Europe was very dismissive.
Well, he upset Putin, didn't he? What did he call it?
Regional power.
Regional power. That was one of the moments.
Barack Obama just wanted to get America out of Europe because he said, look, our problem is Asia and China. And we've got to reorientate. We've got to get out of the Middle East. We've got to get out of Europe. We've got to focus on one thing. So there was a strategic brain there. I mean, I'm not being patronising. I mean, he was strategically literate in that respect. But he took decisions which he didn't manage to implement because the world pulled him back into all of those things. But I don't think America would have been in a better place if he'd been successful carrying all of that through.
I wonder if there was someone in that office who had an ideology, who had a philosophy, something akin to, I don't know, Tony Blair and like liberal interventionism that saw there had to be a line that would not be allowed to cross. Then would have given Ukraine everything it needed when it needed it to make sure that
that would have made a difference,
right?
Yeah. And I mean, to mention Tony Blair. I mean, Tony Blair was in office for 10 years. It was a long time, 3 terms, and it divides almost completely into the first 5 years and the second 5 years. And as far as foreign policy was concerned, in the first 5 years he was successful and lucky. Right. And in the second 5 years, he was unsuccessful and unlucky.
Yeah.
Luck plays a big role.
It really is. It really is. All right. Next one. Keith Kellogg.
Yeah.
The not often spotted at the moment, Keith Kellogg. Reports say that Putin doesn't want him on the Ukraine negotiating team. Is that true? And can you explain? And Captain Sparkle says, thank you, Professor Clarke.
Thank you. Yes, you're exactly right. Putin certainly doesn't want him on because Keith Kellogg began as a Republican, and he wrote this famous paper with Fred Fleiss back in the autumn of last year, which is very, very critical of Biden and the Democrats and so on. And I thought the paper was sort of intelligently written, but very, very unfair. But nevertheless, at the end of it, they had a plan for the way in which the Ukraine crisis could be brought at least to a ceasefire. It was a realistic plan, tough, but it was realistic, and that's why Keith Kellogg was made special envoy for Ukraine and Russia. So Kellogg, who's was a well-respected military figure, a military was a 4-star general, I think he was.
Google it.
Yeah, I think it was 4-star. Yeah, and he goes to Ukraine and he learns much more about it from Ukraine's point of view. He knows the Russians pretty well. And in a way, as far as America was concerned, he went native. He became very pro-Ukrainian.
Right.
And, he always had a realistic view of Russia and Russian military. So immediately the Trump administration sort of left him out of the deals. And they relied on Steve Witkoff and J.D. Vance and his view, and Pete Hegseth as Defense Secretary, War Secretary, as he now calls himself. And Kellogg was sidelined. Then he comes back into it a bit when Trump warms up towards Ukraine, because Kellogg knows what's going on in Kiev. And Kellogg is now regarded as a friend in Kiev. He's an American friend who's realistic. They know he's critical, but he's realistic. And, so he's disappeared from the scene. I mean, if Trump turned again another 180 degrees and goes back to, as it were, championing Ukraine in a ceasefire arrangement, then Kellogg will become relevant again. But while Trump is on the other tack, championing Putin's line on a ceasefire, then Kellogg is not helpful to the way the White House wants to see it.
No, it's a 3-star general.
3-star, okay.
The internet tells me.
So Major General, yeah.
And look,
sorry, Lieutenant General, beg your pardon, 3-star.
Lieutenant General, yes.
I beg his pardon, sorry, Lieutenant General, 3-star.
So, and I wonder how the Ukrainians do feel about him as a man and as a conduit to Trump, because, as you say, he is respected there, but I wonder if they respect him, realise that he's ineffective.
That's the point, Kamali. I mean, I think when they know that he's not well connected to the White House, then they like him, but they know that that's not the line they've got to go on. But at times he has been well connected. In other words, he is listened to occasionally, but not at the moment. And that's the point. His relevance to Ukraine comes and goes with all the flip-flops in the White House. Yeah. And that's the whole problem of dealing with this, because this American government is in a kind of Alice in Wonderland phase where you can't rely on any consistency on the way up. Everything takes place at the top in this crazy merry-go-round of ideas in which truth is neither here nor there and facts are neither here nor there. And people have access at given moments, and then they don't. I mean, it's like a medieval court.
It certainly is.
According to which side of the bed the king got out of that morning.
the one thing the Ukrainians perhaps can rely on is that they can't rely on the Americans at this stage.
Yeah, I mean, everyone's making back. Everyone is trying to flatter Trump because that's one way to try get a favourable answer. But then making backup plans because they know, his goodwill won't last,
Got to have a plan,
or may not last.
Toughnell44. And I'm going to read this out because it's a nice message for you, Michael. He says he looks forward to your weekly podcast. He says you're extremely insightful and knowledgeable. It's very true. His question is, how far is Putin willing to take this war? Russia's resorted to human wave tactics, World War II style. Surely that isn't sustainable. I mean, how far do you think Putin is willing to take this war? Is he just going to continue grinding on?
Yeah.
He has to be stopped.
Well, one of the things we have to realise is that Putin is absolutely fixated on this war. I mean, he sees security and Europe completely differently to the way we see it, as do most of the people around him. And, to understand that sort of discrepancy between conventional Western thinking and Russian thinking, I think is really important. And so, and unless this war is stopped by force, by Western force, I don't mean won by force, but stopped by force, then I can't see it stopping in any other way because the Russians are absolutely determined to carry on at any cost because of the way in which they see this whole process. And as somebody said to me yesterday, one of the things that they can't get their heads around in Moscow is, how can they be struggling in a war against a country that doesn't exist? Ukraine doesn't exist. And the answer is NATO. That's the point. Ukraine doesn't exist. The West has created Ukraine in order to fight us, in order to push us back. And that existential view of Russia is a constant war with its neighbours is that's what we've got to live with. And we can't stop the effects of that until we can put force against it and prove that there is a brick wall beyond which you cannot come. And at the moment, that brick wall doesn't exist, and it's got to be built as quickly as possible.
It's also because Putin and those around him live in this ahistorical context. They've created this world within their minds, haven't they, where Ukraine doesn't exist, where Russia has the right to all this land, where where people speak Russian, and it just doesn't stand up to the facts of history. And actually, not even the facts of history, the facts of where we are right now.
Yeah. And all dictatorships are based on a sense of victimhood. The dictator, and this goes back, go back to Hitler and all the even dictators in the 19th century, in the modern sense, they claim that they are trying to put right a historical injustice of enormous proportions. And for Putin, the historical injustice was the collapse of the Soviet Union, which was all engineered by the West. And when we talk about containment, Putin, when he talks about containment, he's talking about containment in the 18th and 19th centuries. He said the Western countries were always trying to push Russia back. They were always trying to diminish Russia's natural place in the world. And so it's a 200 or 300 year process. He doesn't think of it as an immediate problem or a problem of management. It's a massive process.
There's a natural place everywhere. And the thing is with these dictators as well, there's the grain of truth in their grievance, right? Because he will have an argument about NATO's move towards the east. I mean, we've just talked about Hungary being given membership in 1999, and you tell me that Hungary are absolutely useless member. They're a former member of the Soviet bloc. So, of course, they would be concerned about that sort of thing. We aren't going to dwell too much on that because we've got a final question, which I am looking forward to hearing your answer about. It's from Sauron191, which I think is one of my favourite names as well, for someone to write in. Question is, would it be legal as such to snatch Putin in Hungary and give him to the ICC if the SAS or MI6 devised a mission to do so?
It would be a good question. Actually, would it be legal? I'm not sure it wouldn't be sensible.
But does sense always come into it?
Actually, I don't know. In the sense that it would be.
I don't think I've ever seen you not know the answers on
I need some notice of that one. I suppose what I think is that you would be intervening in a sovereign state, which you recognise as a sovereign state. It's not an ungoverned territory.
Yeah.
If he was in an ungoverned territory, you could certainly do it.
Let's talk it through. So there's a warrant out for him, right? What does that warrant grant people the right to do?
It grants them the right to arrest, that any member of the ICC is obligated to arrest them on their territory, or if their opportunity arises, to arrest them somewhere else. And if in an ungoverned space, that's certainly possible. In a member state, or a state that's not a member of the ICC, it would be possible. But you've got to set that obligation against the sovereign rights of a country.
Because you'd be sending in your own forces.
Yeah, the sovereign rights of Hungary,
Yeah.
not to have foreign forces operate on its soil. So I suppose my answer would be you'd be arguing about two legal principles here. The ICC obligation as against the legal right of a sovereign state to run its own affairs. But it's an interesting legal question, and I have to say I actually don't know that there's a definitive answer to that. I don't know if there is. I don't know what it is. But it would certainly not be a sensible course of action.
No,
that way.
I mean, with international law being what it is at the moment as well. I mean,
well, do you remember that Pinochet, General Pinochet of Chile,
yep.
Who replaced Allende, socialist president of Chile, and was replaced in a coup by Pinochet, supported by the United States. And when Pinochet, and was a great friend of Britain
Yes.
in the Falklands crisis, when Pinochet came to Britain, he was arrested.
He was. I remember.
And Mrs. Thatcher went berserk that we should arrest on the grounds of it wasn't the ICC then, but on the grounds of alleged war crime, that we should arrest a foreign leader. Or somebody had been a foreign leader. And he was eventually, as I remember, released.
Yeah.
But it was a massive issue because you must not arrest foreign leaders of that sort. However, Saddam Hussein, if he'd turned up anywhere else, he would have been arrested. I mean, there are degrees to which people are international pariahs in the rest of the world. And 3 or 4 years ago, Putin would have been an easier target for that sort of argument than he is now because he's emerging from pariah status.
Yeah. Fascinating question, and we'll think on it.
That one's bothered me. That question really bothers me now that you've raised it.
Sauron191, you win the prize. Bothered Michael Clarke. But it's something we will muse on, and we'll come back with,
I'll
with
muse upon that.
some stronger answers next week. All right, Michael, let's wrap it
It's
up.
purely theoretical, but I should...
100%. Well, let's see when they have the meeting and see what actually happens.
Yeah.
Guys, thanks very much for being with us. Michael, of course, as always, thank you so much. We will try and do this again next week if we can make our schedules align. Thank you for now. Have a great rest of your day.